Tonight's podcast is brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. Funny Bone Broth sources all bones locally from a farm just north of Toronto. They use only organic vegetables, simple quality ingredients, and small batch production. Their broth is low in sodium, low in fat, high in protein, and extremely high in delicious flavor. Visit their website at funnybonebroth.com.
In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos Postgame Reaction Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Grant. The Argos couldn't quite get it done tonight as they drop a heartbreaker, 27-24 to the Montreal Alouettes. The Argos fall to 3-13. The Owls improved to 9-7, and none of that matters. But that didn't stop us from enjoying the game tonight. No matter who you were cheering for. Tonight's game is what is so amazing about sports. The game didn't mean anything to either team. The game didn't matter. But there we were in the fourth quarter. Time ticking down. You're squeezing your couch pillows tight. You're yelling at your TV. You're standing. You're cheering. You're emotionally crushed when they couldn't quite pull it out at the end. It was a meaningless game. But once that whistle blows, you can't help but ride the roller coaster, the peaks and valleys. I wasn't sure coming into this one what kind of game it would be. When they played last time in Moncton, it was awesome. It came down to the last 0.3 seconds, I think. And here we are. The Argos are out of it. You know, maybe we're looking to try a few guys in different roles, prepare for next year. The Owls are locked into their playoff spots, so they really have nothing to play for. And all that considered, it was a sensational game because it could have been like a preseason game. It could have had that feel to it, and it just never really did. I expected Montreal to rest a bunch of guys. They had a couple of starters out, and I know they pulled Stanback when he got over 1,000 yards, and of course that didn't help. Because Jeremiah Johnson came in and suddenly turned into Mike Pringle, so it almost made it worse. Montreal had a lot of movement on the offensive line, some changes. I know Kennedy Estelle got hurt last week. He's their left tackle, so Chris Luger moved from right tackle to left tackle. They brought Landon Rice in off the bench to play right tackle. I thought we could actually take advantage of that because he's more of a guard than a tackle, but it didn't really seem to have an impact. Their line actually played pretty well. There's some changes for the Argos too, but it wasn't to get guys rest, with a couple of the guys from Montreal. Alden Darby suffered an injury last week, so Jermaine Gabriel, the Scarborough kid, stepped in, playing free. Shaq Richardson, who the Argos just signed like 3 days ago, was suddenly starting at corner, and Woodson moved over to halfback. I was really excited about Richardson. He had a pretty quiet game, but he's been here for like 3 days. So, I don't know what we could have expected. But yeah, he was a great DB in college at Arizona. The Steelers took him in the 5th round. This is back in 2014. He never really stuck anywhere in the NFL. He bounced around a bit. And then Calgary picked him up in 2016. He got a lot of playing time, but he never really lived up to that expectation, I guess. And maybe a fresh start in Toronto will do him some good. Darrell Walker was also out, so Chandler Worthy got a bunch of time. He had a huge game. And on a side note, so Chandler Worthy is wearing number 00, which I find weird. We've already got a 0 on the team in Toby Antigua, which is already odd. And I think, first of all, isn't 00 and 0 the same? Isn't that the same number? I know it's the same value. Maybe it doesn't matter in terms of jersey numbers. I have never seen any team in any sport field a 0 and a 00 in the same game. They were both starters, 0 and 00. There's a lot of numbers to choose from. That's what we got. So let me give you a rundown here. So on first down, I'll recap the game. On second down, we'll do some analysis. I'll tell you the play where the game was lost. And it's not the missed field goal. And then on third down, we'll go over what you can expect going forward from the Argos and why you don't want to miss the final home game of the season next week.
Offside.
Wait till you hear Red Cashin say first down.
That penalty is declined.
Here it comes.
First down!
Here it comes. First down, says Red Cashin.
So everything was going right for the Owls in the first half. The Argos couldn't get it out of their own way. Vernon Adams fumbles the snap, like the third or fourth play of the game. Somehow he recovers it, and then a play later he launches a ball to Posey, who just burns Woodson. And that just looked like a mental mistake on Woodson's part. He came into press, it looked like, so you have Posey playing out of the slot, and Posey's always trouble when he plays the Argos. So Woodson comes in. He looks like he's coming into press Posey, which is a little bit, you don't see that a lot in Canadian football on slot receivers, because it's much easier to get past a press when you're out of the slot, when you've got that run up. If you're on the line, that's one thing. You can get, right in the guy's face. But even then, it's not the same as the NFL. You've still got to give that full yard. So it's much more difficult to press Canadian receivers, or rather in the Canadian game. So he came up and he looked like he was going to press. He was going to challenge Posey. And then right before Posey got to the line of scrimmage, it looked like he changed his mind, started backing out of there. Posey made a move. Woodson got all spun around. And then it looked like Posey was running an out, and Vernon Adams sort of threw it into a corner route instead. And Posey sort of picked up the ball in the air. There was definitely a little chicken wing in there. Chicken wing is where a receiver. This is a classic receiver tool. So it's basically offensive pass interference, but it's really hard to see, and so it's a move that's used all the time. So basically, you keep your arms in at your sides, you body in close to the DB, and then right at that point of separation, you extend your elbow out. That's the chicken wing part. And you've got the DB going one way, you're now going the other way, and you propel yourself towards the football. And that's what happened here, and it didn't help that Woodson was lost, didn't know where the ball was anyway. Posey chicken wings himself open. It was a beautiful pass from Adams, and that set up that opening score, because a couple of plays later, they end up kicking a field goal, and it's 3-0 for the Owls. And that's how the first quarter would end. There wasn't much else going on in that first quarter. The Argos were pretty quiet. And into the second quarter, it was more Posey, the Argo killer. And he got a touchdown early in the second quarter. It might have been like the fourth or fifth play in the second quarter. This was a heck of a route. So again, Posey's in the slot. He's on the right side. And he takes a hard cut to the outside. And this is not just... he ends up running back to the inside. And if you have a chance to, again, this is a play that you probably want to check out, because it was just an amazing route. I think I have a video of it on my Twitter feed if you want to check, at Ben_Grant. I have it somewhere in my timeline. It was an amazing route. So he motions to the outside, but it's not just like a single step like you often see with, a step to the outside and then a post route. This was a full body turn. It looked like he was going to run a speed out, which, down by the 5-yard line is a really dangerous route. And so Tremaine Washington goes hard for that pick, or to at least stop him, prior to getting to the goal line. And then Posey just jams on the brakes, cuts back inside, and he's wide open for the touchdown. And Washington's nowhere to be found. It was a beautiful route, great throw from Adams, and just like that, it's 10-0 Alouettes. And the receivers were not helping out McLeod, Bethel, Thompson today. He had a really good game, a strong game. The receivers played really well in the second half, but that first half, they looked like they weren't engaged. They looked like they weren't ready to play. We had a couple strange ones, like Edwards had a ball that he really should have caught. He was out near the sideline. I can't remember the route. I think he was running a seam, and he got turned around. I think Bethel Thompson was rolling to his left and fired it up. Edwards turned around, and he jumped and landed before the ball got there. And if he had just sort of waited, timed it properly, and that's something that Edwards can do in his sleep. And he's got such an amazing vertical. We saw that last week. But he just didn't. He didn't time it right. The ball ends up landing out of bounds. We were able to somehow get a field goal with all that poor play that we had in the first half. We were able to get a field goal out of the deal. So it was 10-3. And then the Owls come right back again with a ho-hum drive, a couple run plays, short passes, nothing exciting. They add another field goal, 13-3. But I was thinking that at the time, Vernon Adams, who I guess they wanted to sort of keep out of harm's way a little bit, and that makes sense. They don't want to get him killed in a meaningless game when they got the playoffs coming up. But they ran a read option a few times, and if Vernon Adams had pulled that, he could have run the distance. He could have run for 80 yards because the Argos were all over the Als running backs on those read options. And of course, near the end of the game, Adams did end up running. This wasn't on a read option, mind you. It was on a draw play, but we were sort of waiting for that all game, thinking at some point he's going to go, and he did it when it mattered most. So the Toronto offense still can't move, so the defense starts taking chances, which I really like. And this was one of my criticisms of Chamberlain over the last couple of weeks, is that the defense was not taking chances, was not being aggressive, but they really were in the second quarter. They left Quadarius Ford on an island on this one play. They sent so many guys to try and bring down Adams, and you ended up with Ford back there trying to cover a post and a go route, and there's no one within miles. Somehow he made the play. But it's because Adams was under such heat that he can't get a good throw off, and I'd rather see that. And again, you're a 3-win team. You're out of the playoffs. Take chances. I think every play on defense should be aggressive in some way. Try something out. Go after the ball. And, that same philosophy holds true for me for third downs. I don't know most of the time, unless it's extreme. I don't know why you're punting on third down. Like for what? What are you waiting for? What are you trying to preserve as a 3-win team? So be a gambler. Take chances. And that's fun. And that gets people engaged and interested. And we were certainly interested in that Argo defense in the second quarter. That got me pretty fired up, seeing these 7-man blitzes that we were sending. So there's a minute left in the half. Macbeth decides to put the team on his back and go at it. And this really felt like we were going to get points out of this drive. This felt like it was going to turn into a touchdown. We've seen Macbeth do this a bunch of times before. He had a great pass out to Chandler Worthy, who I mentioned earlier. He had a great game. It was into cover 2. Worthy's on the outside. And this is a pass that Bethel Thompson just faded beautifully to the sideline, where the safety couldn't get over in time. It was just beyond the corner's reach. Excellent catch by Worthy, but it was a well-placed ball by Bethel Thompson, and he was under pressure as well. So we're well within field goal range, and then Ottawa dials up that 7-man rush. We only had 4 receivers on routes. 7 guys came after Bethel Thompson. He's looking for Worthy again, but it looked like he expected Worthy to do something different, and if one of the 2 guys made a mistake, I'm going to say it was probably Worthy and not Bethel Thompson, but he lost his mind on Worthy after that play because he had to take a sack, and that pushed them back to now a 50-yard field goal, and Krapina couldn't get it through. So we missed the 50-yarder. That obviously would have been a difference maker when you go back later in the game and kind of think, man, that 3 points would have really helped. And that was a huge play, taking that sack. And while Worthy ran the wrong route, possibly, we think so, I still put that on Bethel Thompson. He's got to know in that scenario, no matter what he sees downfield, you just can't take a sack. And if you see that 7-man rush coming, you just got to get rid of that ball. No matter where you throw it, get rid of the football. Let's kick a field goal. Because 50 yards it's been proven over the last few weeks. That's too much. 50 yards is too long a field goal to put any faith in Krapina right now, because he's missed the last few that we've asked him to kick from 50 or more. So we go into the third quarter, and Bethel Thompson's still trying to engage his receivers, and there was a real turning point here. So the Argos ended up having to punt after a disastrous second down, where again Ottawa sent a ton of pressure. None of the receivers were looking back, and Bethel Thompson again lost it on Jimmy Ralph and on Rodney Smith, because both of them, if you look at that replay, they're on the left side, and you can clearly see 7 guys are coming. And both of them ran their routes to the full distance. And what receivers are taught to do is, if you've got something like, if you've got a hook route on 2nd and 4, which I think it was, there's no sense taking that from 10 yards back to 8 or from 12 back to 10 or whatever you're coached to do. If you see a 7-man blitz, you hold up at the first down marker, you look early for that catch. If you can, you move into the void created by the blitzing defender. You find a way to adjust to that play, because they're sending 7. We can't block 7. So you've got to be ready early. And Bethel Thompson looked for Ralph early. Ralph hadn't turned around yet. By the time he did, the ball was at his feet. And there we are punting again. So, yeah, I think Macbeth losing it on Ralph and Smith fired the team up because there was definitely a momentum shift after that. So the defense comes in, forces a 2-and-out, and then we have a fantastic drive from the offense who were determined now not to let Bethel Thompson down. Here was a guy that was giving it everything he had, and so everyone stepped up. So Bethel Thompson fires one out, hits Green, then hits Worthy, Edwards. There's a quarterback sneak in there, and then he goes deep to Worthy. And I thought this was a touchdown. Looking at the replay, it's hard to see. I think it's one of those that if it had been called a touchdown, you wouldn't have been able to reverse it. But Worthy's in man coverage. Great coverage, by the way. That's Tommy Campbell, who's like 6'2", draped all over Worthy, who's not a huge guy. It's a perfect throw. Somehow Worthy bodies out Campbell, makes the catch. Gorgeous catch. Slides into the end zone as Campbell touches him. And it looked to me on that replay like Campbell didn't touch him until he had crossed the goal line. It doesn't matter from a scoreboard point of view. Bethel Thompson punched it in on the next play. But it would have been nice to see Worthy get that touchdown. He ends up with one later in the game, but this was the kind of performance from Worthy where you would like to have seen that. And you would have liked to have seen just an extra passing touchdown for Bethel Thompson, because I know that a passing touchdown means much more to him as a stat than a rushing touchdown. So anyway, we end up at the 1-yard line. Macbeth punches it in, looking very James Franklin-like as he sort of strafed to the right down the offensive line and walked into the end zone for the score. So it's 13-10 Montreal. Toronto looking suddenly really good. And then on the next drive, Adams gets absolutely crushed by Gilchrist. He didn't see him coming. He stepped up in the pocket. He's rolling to his right. Gilchrist, who was sort of ridden around to the outside, now was coming back in the play, running full speed at Adams from behind, and he levels him. And Adams goes down. And I thought at that point, that's it. He's coming out of the game. Like whether or not he had an injury at that point, I think as a coach at that point, I don't know how you don't pull him from that game. You just looking at that play, knowing how important he is to your team, knowing the game doesn't mean anything. I couldn't believe that Kahari didn't pull him from the game at that point. Say, okay, look, let's pack this up for now and live to play another day. But credit to Adams and to the coaching staff for believing in him, and they needed him. This would not have been a Montreal win without Vernon Adams staying in that game. So Argos get the ball back, and it's another fantastic drive. Bethel Thompson hits Rodney Smith, Jimmy Ralph, Smith again, who's so wide open on this play. There's another play where Montreal sent 7. We got 4 receivers out there. And I think Greg Reed, who's playing corner for Montreal, I think he thought he had help over top, but Smith just got in behind him, and there was nobody there. But because of the pressure, Bethel Thompson threw it off his back foot. It was on its way out of bounds, and Smith caught the ball, but he couldn't keep his feet in. I think he wishes, looking at that replay and sort of seeing how wide open he was, I think he wishes he could have had that one back, because he probably, in retrospect, could have found a way to keep his feet in bounds, lunged for that ball, caught it, and had time to walk into the end zone. But as it was, again, it was one of those things where it didn't matter, because a few plays later, S.J. Green with a catch, S.J. Green with another catch, and that one's for a touchdown. This was a really nice play. You had a cover 1 from Montreal. This is from the 6-yard line, I think. And so we've got Twins to the right. Green's out there with Worthy. Green sort of waggles out behind Worthy, sort of like in a stack, but the ball snaps sort of right as Green gets there. And that's tough with man coverage, because you've got to initiate a switch now, or not, depending on what you think's happening. So Worthy has a spike release. Green follows him on a slant path and then just suddenly jams on the brakes. And there's no way that the defender can get in there. It's a great throw. And now suddenly the Argos are up 17-13, and we're feeling pretty good, because we're thinking here, all right, the Owls are going to call off the Dogs. They're going to pack things up for the day. The Argos have been gaining momentum. They've scored in their last 2 drives. It's been 2-and-outs for the defense. But this is the Alouettes thing. They all season long have started the game poorly, found themselves in a hole, and found a way to rally back. And of course, that's what happens in the fourth quarter. So Jeremiah Johnson with this classic screen pass, it went for a 45-yard touchdown. And this is a play that I think everyone watching at home saw coming, and none of our linemen picked it up. Our defensive linemen had been charging in those last 2 drives. It's a great play call from the Montreal bench. Because they'd seen how aggressive our D-line had been playing for those last 2 series. They were great. And so perfect time for a screen pass. Our guys go flying in untouched, so excited that the quarterback's right in front of them, and Adams just lofts the ball over their heads to Johnson, and now suddenly they got 5 O-linemen charging downfield, taking out our DBs. Shaq Richardson got just absolutely leveled by one of the linemen. It was not pretty. So that score puts Montreal back on top, 2017, and the Argos on their next drive end up punting the ball away. I'll talk about that a little bit later. It was a 3rd and 8 situation. They're down by 3. Near midfield. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I thought that was a pretty questionable decision. So the Alouettes get the ball back, and there's that huge QB draw that I talked about a little earlier, where Adams just ran past our entire defense and got all the way down to the Argos 18. And then on the very next play, we aggressively send 6. It's cover 0. Adams knows where the heat's coming from. He buys time. He just rolls a bit to his right, knowing that the unblocked guy is coming from his blind side, and lofts it out to Bray, who makes an amazing catch. It was a perfect throw. Awesome catch. And now Montreal is up 27-17 with 3:30 to go. And we've been in this position before, and we know how this ends. But this is where the CFL is amazing, because in the NFL, that game's over. With 3:30 to go, a 10-point game, you need a miracle. But how many times have you seen it in the CFL, regardless of who ends up winning the game, where it at least comes down to those last few plays because there's time? And I love those CFL rules. So Macbeth is back at it, 3:30 to go. He hits Smith, hits Green, hits Worthy, back to Green again, to Edwards, to Worthy, to Edwards, and then a touchdown pass to Worthy. This was a risky pass. I held my breath for a second. We had quads to the left. We're from like the 5-yard line. Quads to the left. The number 1 receiver is running a go route. Worthy's got a speed out, and it's up to the wide side of the field. This is such a long throw to throw a speed out to the number 2 receiver on the wide side of the field. So you're on the far hash and you're making that throw. It's like a 55-yard pass basically for a 5-yard gain. And so Worthy hits that speed out. It was a great route, but man, that almost was picked for a 109-yard touchdown the other way. But we made the catch. Worthy gets the TD that he very much deserved, and Bethel Thompson gets that TD pass he deserved. And we're within 3. So here we are staring a 27-24 ball game in the face, and we've got to now decide: do we kick onside? Do we punt it deep with a timeout left still to go? It's just over a minute left in the game. So they end up deciding to kick it deep, and I'll talk about that decision a bit later too. I actually like that decision, but I'll tell you why in a bit. So they kick it deep. The defense plays an amazing 1st and 2nd down. They can't move the ball at all. They have to punt it away. We've got great field position with over 30 seconds to go. We move the ball downfield, and then S.J. Green has a drop, which he never, ever, ever does. S.J. Green drops the ball. We still end up, Jimmy Ralph converts on the next play, and you get it into reasonable range, but you just wonder what might have been if we'd had that extra 5 or 6 yards. Because here we are once again setting up for a Crepinha field goal from 51 yards, and it's short. And that is the end of the game. The flags wave, the whistle goes. The Alouettes win 27-24.
Pass interference by the offense, number 80. 10-yard penalty, repeat 2nd down.
All right, let's do some analysis here. So there were no turnovers in this game, which is amazing from an Argos standpoint. The Argos are a team that has had turnover problems all season long. And it's pretty astonishing that in a game where they had no turnovers, they couldn't pull it out somehow. But that's because Montreal also had no turnovers. And you kind of wondered if this might be an issue. Last week, Adams threw 4 interceptions, and you knew he wasn't going to come back this week and have that same kind of performance. And he was just determined to have a good game. So I kind of worried a little bit about that early on. I thought it was... Offensively, I thought it was a little questionable in the first half where we didn't take any shots. I'll take that back. We took one shot deep. It was one pass where we really went deep. It was in the second quarter, midway through, and Bethel Thompson just launched it, and it was overthrown by about 10 yards, but we ended up getting the Alouettes got a penalty on the play for roughing the passer. I felt like the Alouettes were pressing so hard that you need to take some deep shots. I think you have to build them into your script as an offensive coordinator, where you come into that game with 10 or 20 plays that you really feel comfortable with. You're going to work on these. This is your game plan. And you don't have to follow it in the exact order in which you've written it up. But it is a guideline. And usually in that script, you work in things where you're seeing how they'll respond to different looks, seeing how they'll respond to different matchups and what matchups you can create. But also in that script, you don't script, unless you're like Nebraska or something, you don't script like 17 straight run plays or 30 straight passing plays. You don't script like that. You try and mix it up a bit. You try and vary it a little bit. And I felt that our offensive game plan in that first half was missing that deep ball, just to stretch out the defense. I felt like they thought coming in without Walker there, missing that extra deep threat, Worthy in his place, that they could maybe play up a little bit. And so it was tough on Bethel Thompson without having those deep concepts where he was always having to check down and throw short because there were so many defenders all over the place in those short zones. So that's something I would like to have seen that I thought Chapdelaine could have done a little differently in terms of game planning. Montreal seemed pretty content in that first half to send 5 or 6 pretty much every play. They threw in some zone blitzes as well, some creative stuff, which, again, I wasn't expecting to see because typically a team in this position, knowing that Edmonton's going to be watching and the West is going to be watching all of Montreal's games really closely, I didn't think we would see anything creative. I thought it was going to be a very vanilla preseason looking offense and defense from Montreal, but we just didn't get that. In the second half, it looked like the Argos found something. So they started running some RPOs, not so much as RPOs, but they were RPO plays that were really taking the place of play action. But because you have those linemen coming up field, and it's short passes again, but now it's different because with that heavy play action, especially with the line movement that you get on RPOs, the backers were coming in. And so while those short zones were really crowded in the first half, by utilizing that heavy play action, you're now drawing in the backers, you're creating more space and more voids for your receivers to find, more windows for them to sit in. And that worked really well. And that's when Bethel Thompson put those drives together in the third quarter, a lot of those plays were RPOs where he had no intention of actually reading it and potentially handing off the ball. Just the design of it was such that we're going to bring in those backers, we're going to create space. And that's how he completed pass after pass after pass, working his way down the field. One thing that bothered me with this game was, and I've talked about this in the last couple games as well, and this is a season-long frustration for me. I know that the CFL is a passing league, but I can't understand why Wilder doesn't get more carries than he does. Wilder was running really well tonight. He is one of the best backs in the league, in my opinion. And for whatever reason, he just wasn't getting any carries. He ended up tonight with 6 carries for 39 yards. So he's averaging almost 7 yards a carry. And yet he only gets those 6 carries in the game. And I know the Argos were behind a little bit and you had to start throwing, obviously, in the fourth quarter. But there were certainly opportunities there where you feel like, this is a guy that can get you those first downs, those all important first downs, and instead we're throwing passes out to Jimmy Ralph, and nothing against Jimmy Ralph, but if Wilder Jr. is one of your best players, and I think he is, then why are we only using him 6 times a game? And I think that's something that maybe needs to be addressed for next year. Just looking at how we're utilizing our best players. And, I don't know what happens at practice, and I don't know what everyone's health status is like. Maybe Wilder Jr. is banged up a bit. Maybe he's been banged up for the last 2 months. I don't know. But just from the outside looking in, that was one of those things that I really didn't understand. And it's not, maybe it didn't hurt them that much in this game. Like, obviously, Bethel Thompson played extremely well. He completed 78% of his passes, threw for 342 yards, 2 touchdowns, probably should have been 3, no interceptions. So he had a great game. It's not like, our offense wasn't working anywhere else. But I just feel like that's an advantage that the Argos have, especially late in games where he's just such a big body. And as your defense starts getting tired out, and especially in this game, as Montreal's defense is starting to wonder why their starters are looking around wondering, why are we still in this game? I think that's a time where it would really have been an advantage to run Wilder Jr. I was actually really happy with that play call near the end of the game. It was like 30 seconds left, ball's near midfield, and we ran a running play, which you never see. A little bit more in the CFL just because of the stopped clock. But yeah, Wilder Jr. ran a running play. I thought it would go for more. It only ended up getting about 8 yards. But I thought that was a sensible play call because he's one of your best players. Get the ball in his hands. You're expecting them to play pretty deep, quarters or something like that, a deep shell, and maybe he could break one for 25 yards. He didn't in this case, but I thought the play call was great. And generally in the second half, I thought the play calling was really good. Another note, and this is just something that I wrote down, was that I love the film angle for this game. Whenever we play in Montreal, all the games filmed from Montreal, they have such a nice film angle. It's just great for watching football. It's so much higher than you see in the other stadiums. You have a great view, and they don't zoom. They could really screw it up by zooming in and having such a tight film that you can't tell what's going on at all. But they don't really make a mistake on that side. You get to watch not quite wide film like you'd see if you're watching all 24s, but it is an angle that allows you to see way more than you see for the televised games that are played, at BMO or in Edmonton or Calgary or anywhere else. So that's something that I really enjoyed, and I found that I could get a lot more out of the game. It was just more enjoyable to watch. I think that's the draw as you learn more about football, and I would encourage anyone, if you're someone that's just started watching football, or maybe you know the rules, you understand it, but you've never really gotten into the X's and O's of the game, I really encourage you to do that, because there's it is an amazing sport, and until you start grasping some of those things, you're left in the dark, sort of not understanding what it is that so many people love about it. This sport / chess match every time, and if you can go to games, then your angle is always great, and that's something where I think if you enjoyed that camera angle today, if you thought, well, this is actually really cool. I can watch receiver matchups on the outside. I can watch backers out in coverage. I can see where the safety's playing. Then I would encourage you to get out to as many games as you can, and don't pay for those really expensive seats. Sit up in the upper deck, because that's where you can see everything happen, and you'll find you really enjoy the game from there, and you get so much more out of it. And I thought we got a little taste of that today. It was a little bit like being at the game today. All right, let's talk about some of these decisions near the end of the game. So here's the situation. It's the fourth quarter. We're down by 3. I think it was 20-17. 3rd and 8 near midfield. As I said, 7:50 to go. They decide to punt. I thought this was a terrible play call, or a terrible decision, rather, to punt the ball instead of going for it. You're the Argos. You've got 3 wins. There's nothing to lose. 7:50 to go. 3rd and 8 near midfield. You've got to take a shot. Go for it. You got S.J. Green. You've got guys that love making big plays. Worthy's having a huge game. Edwards is always there when it matters most. You've got one of the best running backs in the league. There's something you've got to be able to draw up at that point and have faith in your guys and say, it's 3rd and 8, we're going to get this first down. And even if you don't, it's not like you're turning over the ball on your own 10-yard line. They're still at midfield. As it was, we end up punting the ball. It goes out of bounds for a penalty, and now the Owls start in the 34. So we only got 20 yards out of it. So it's not like it even turned into, a coffin corner or something like that. So I thought, to me, that was where we lost the game. And I know it came down to that missed field goal at the end. But I thought as soon as I saw them punting that football with 7:50 to go, I thought, man, this is not a game that we're going to win. Because you've got to, when you're a team like the Argos and you've got the kind of season that we've had this year, you're not going to win games by being conservative. You're going to win games by taking chances and being aggressive. And that was an opportunity they had there to be aggressive and set the tone, and they end up punting it away. And to me, that was the ball game. The decision to kick it deep. So we scored the touchdown to get within 3. There's 1:15 left. I love this decision. I think you 100% kick it deep. If this is the NFL, then you have no choice. I think we only had one timeout at that point. Then you have no choice. You have to onside kick if it's the NFL. But the CFL, you've got time. So as you saw in that first down play, we end up stopping the Alouettes for like a 4-yard loss. Now it's 2nd and 14. They run the ball again. We get a timeout in there and really good field position because they've got their hands team in there for the onside kick, so they're not initiating any kind of return. So you're going to back them up, and then add into the fact that they're going to be running the ball in those first 2 plays, especially in this game because they just didn't want Vernon Adams taking any more shots. And so that was absolutely the right thing to do. And there we were at the end. We had a chance. So that was the decision I really liked. Last thing I want to talk about in our analysis section here on 2nd down, I want to talk about that 51-yard field goal. It doesn't matter for this year, but I think for next season we need to look elsewhere in terms of a kicker. I really like Tyler Crapigna. I think he's an excellent kicker. I think he's very accurate. I loved following him at McMaster and then his journey through the CFL. And I would hate to see him go from that standpoint. But I think in today's CFL, you need to be able to consistently make a 50-yard field goal because every other team is doing that. And for the second time in 3 weeks, we had a 51-yard field goal that came up short, and not just a yard short. Today's was about 5 yards short, and the one in BC that he missed from 51 was about 5 yards short as well. And that's just not something that we can afford to have. And I don't expect. I think the Argos are actually in a good spot for next year. It's early yet, and I don't know how can I say that, but I actually feel pretty optimistic about next season, whether I've got rationale for that or not. But I don't feel like the Argos are going to be good enough where field goals don't matter. They're going to come into play, and this is going to be wins and losses based on being able to kick field goals from 50 yards plus. And I think we need to bring someone in next year that is going to be able to do that with some consistency. And maybe this is something, because I know I've seen him in the past hit field goals over 50 yards. So maybe this is something where he's got muscle tightening or there's been an injury that we don't hear about. But if that's not the case, then I think we have to start looking around and seeing if there's someone else that we can pick up.
Ball start. Offense. Everyone except the center. 3rd down.
So what do we have going forward here? I think we saw more today that confirms for me that McLeod Bethel-Thompson is going to be our starting quarterback next year. I think at this point, him having the numbers that he's had this year, even though they haven't necessarily resulted in as many wins as we'd like, certainly that's an understatement. But I think you're going to see McLeod Bethel-Thompson as a quarterback next year. I think that's one of the things that we got out of today, him having another solid performance in really what is a statistically good season for him if you take out the wins-losses part, which, obviously that's the only thing that matters, but I'm not too sure how much we can pin on him for that. So, that's a position that I think we kind of had confirmed a little bit here. For most of the rest of the game, it was actually pretty hard to tell. I thought the O-line struggled a little bit today, but it was hard to really, peg any one guy or even two guys. Just sort of as a unit, we seemed to have trouble when they sent heat with blitz pickups. And I don't know if that's just, I'll have to come back and take a look at the film over the next few days and maybe give you a bit better an opinion on that. But it just, it was pretty tough to evaluate individual players today. I thought certainly it looked like we had something in Worthy, and that's a bit weird because he's been on the team for a couple of years now, but I was really pleased with how he played today. And certainly I think Richardson deserves a little bit more looking at. He didn't do anything to make me think that this wasn't a good pickup. A guy that we just signed 3 days ago, I thought, all things considered, played pretty well. And I thought A.J. Ouellette today played pretty well, the Ohio running back that we've been hearing about. And he got in the game. I think he got in the game a little bit last week. I feel like he got in the game a bit last week, but this week they had talked about how they were going to play him, and yeah, he had a pretty solid game. Stats wise, he ended up finishing. It was only 4 carries, but 20 yards, 5 yards a carry. Had a couple pickups in there. Was decent in pass protection. So I thought that was a real positive from him, and so I think you'll probably see a little bit more of him next week, and that'd be another reason to check out the game. And I think one of the biggest reasons to check out the game next week is that I think there's a chance that Michael O'Connor might play. Not the whole game. I think Bethel Thompson starts. But I think there's a good chance that we'll see Michael O'Connor get into the game. And if you don't know who Michael O'Connor is, that's not your fault. He really hasn't had any CFL action. But he's a Canadian quarterback who really has quite an impressive resume, and he's someone that a lot of Canadian football fans have been following since, pretty much since he was in grade 10. So he ended up playing, he was playing somewhere near Ottawa in grade 10, set all kinds of passing records. So he ended up going down to the States. He ended at IMG Academy in Florida, which is always viewed as one of the top programs in the United States. And coming out of IMG, ESPN actually had him ranked as the 6th best high school quarterback prospect. So he ends up at Penn State, but he didn't really like the landscape there because, of course, the guys that they had playing alongside him. So he sat out he didn't play in his freshman year. I don't think he was redshirted. I think he just didn't get any time. So he ended up transferring to UBC and played at UBC for his entire university career and led the Thunderbirds to a Vanier Cup. And he actually was the MVP of that game as well. And it set all sorts of Canadian passing records. So, yeah, he's had an absolutely remarkable high school and college career. He's a guy that can make every single throw. He's very bright. He's played the Canadian game before, too, and that's something that a lot of, the American quarterbacks coming up always have that little bit of a learning curve with the 12th defender and everything else. And, he has had a ton of experience in Canadian football, and he has that arm strength and he has the knowledge. And I would love to see what he can do. I'm not suggesting that he's going to replace Bethel Thompson as the quarterback, but we just don't know. We don't know what he is. And obviously the Argos see him at practice. And if they felt that he was a golden ticket, they would have started him earlier in the season. So obviously they're not looking at him like that. But why don't we see? Why don't we get him into a game next week? And Ottawa, who we're playing next week, is going to be lining up a young kid in Will Arndt. And so, why not put these two head to head and see who looks better? I think that would be a sensible move. And Chamberlain kind of alluded to that being a possibility even today in one of his interviews. He didn't rule out the possibility that we might see Prukop or O'Connor. And so I think there's a chance that next week at home is when it happens. And that'd be a pretty exciting thing to see, to be there live for O'Connor's debut. The last reason to go check out next week's game, it is the final home game of the season. It's a 4:00 start. And those are always great because you get a bunch of kids out. The stadium's usually a bit more full, and that's something that we have not been able to say in like a month. when there's actually been a pretty good crowd there. So I think we will get a pretty good crowd for next week's game. Hopefully the weather's nice. As I said, there'll be all sorts of kids there and promotions and events, and it'll be a real atmosphere. And even the last game at BMO was an amazing atmosphere. The country night game, where it wasn't that it was crowded, because of course there weren't that many people there, but the people that are there are diehard fans, and they're cheering and they're screaming, and it's a really fun, friendly environment. And I think being a 4:00 start is more than enough reason to go. And you add in all those other things, at the very least, you got to check out this game on TV. So that's what's up next for the Argos. 4:00, Saturday afternoon. The Red Blacks are back in town. I'll see you there. Thanks for listening to the X's and Argos postgame reaction podcast. I've got a couple things coming up this week that you may want to look for. I'll have a video segment that I should have out about Tuesday, and then I hope to do a preview podcast of the Argos matchup for this week with the Ottawa Red Blacks, and that should drop probably Wednesday or Thursday. Again, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Again, the final from Montreal, the Alouettes 27, the Argonauts 24. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.